1 second. All right, this is Tim Wheeler. This is the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of LPEA for April 2026. That's a call to order. Now, let's have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Dusty's moved. Anyone second?
Second.
Thank you, Kohler. Any changes, suggestions or questions around the agenda? All right, so all in favor of the agenda, I guess raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we can move ahead. Next is the minutes. Another motion, please, for the March 2026 minutes.
So moved.
Thank you again, Dusty. Second, please.
Second.
And Kohler. Any errors, suggestions, corrections? Seems okay. All right, all in favor of approving the agenda, raise your hand, say aye.
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 Again, it's unanimous, no opposing or abstentions, so we can move along. Next is the February financials reviews. Those are actuals that we looked at preliminarily at to some degree in March. Anything change on those, Monica?
No, nothing changed. So everything stayed as was presented last month.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Polar has a question.
Yeah, so on page 1, and it's page 5 of 17 of the onboard, the financial statements there. In the first one where it explains revenue, rate, stabilization, cost of power, and below that it has the gross margins before rate stabilization and with rate stabilization. And I'm wondering why with rate stabilization, it's a higher negative number than without the rate stabilization. I would think that those two would be just the opposite. Can you help me with that? And it's the same when we go down and look at operating margins for February.
So it's increasing the variance because of the 703,000 of the rate stabilization being budgeted but not being actual, and so it's creating a larger variance versus looking at the statement of operations without the monthly amortization of that rate stabilization. So the first draft without the rate stabilization is making the assumption that we will just be posting that actual in December versus the monthly entry.
Could you repeat the very first part you said? I couldn't quite hear that.
So I was just saying that the 703,000 is the budgeted increase in revenue or rate stabilization, which would, on the budget side, increase our gross margins if we had chosen to make an actual entry every month for the rate stabilization, where I think in January we decided that the actual rate stabilization entry would occur in December once we had all of the numbers, so we could do a final analysis of what exactly was needed on the rate stabilization.
So then, I guess that's just the forecasted part. Because I would think if we didn't actually post it, it would be the same as not having it, but I guess not. Is that correct? Am I making sense?
Correct. So there's the two different presentations. That first one is without it, so that we can compare actual to budget without that rate stabilization. And then the second presentation is presenting the budget information with the amortized monthly rate stabilization entry. But it's not a good comparison because we're not making an actual entry on the rate stabilization. So your comparative gross margins has, on that second statement, has an increase of 700,000 every month on the budget side.
Okay. I'm gonna have to absorb that, so thank you. Try to get it to come there.
Maybe it would be easier if we saw those numbers on the
Sure,
screen.
yeah, let me go ahead.
You could point those out. Because I think what you're saying is when you look, if you remove rate stabilization, it's actual against actual on the actual against a budget that is with it. I guess without it, right? If it's
Right,
yeah, I
so
guess
can you
that's
guys
the
see my
question. Is the forecast doesn't change. It's the actual versus the
So page
forecast.
one has, so the actuals stay the same on the two different, on both statements of operation. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this is the statement of operations without the rate stabilization. So 3 million is our gross margins in February. And then this is the statement of operation with the rate stabilization being spread evenly throughout the year. So our actuals again stay the same, but our forecasted gross margins change because of this monthly amortization of the rate stabilization. And so you'll have a bigger, decrease or bigger variance on an actual to forecast on gross margins if you're including the 700,000 in your rate stabilization. If you're including that amount in your gross margins for the month. And so.
Right.
So
Does
this
it answer your
presentation.
question? Kohler?
I think it does. It's going to take me a while to sit there and work through it. So thank you. That gives me a good start to help myself out. So thank you.
Any other questions on February? Or did you have an additional question? Your hand is still up.
So is your question about the
sorry.
difference between before and after rate stabilization? Is that?
Thank
Or
you.
where does
Asking why there was a bigger variance with the forecasted rate stabilization versus before, and that's because of that 700,000.
I see. Okay.
I was
All right.
I was there with you, Kohler. I had it in my head backwards too. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's non-intuitive. When you first look at the negative growing, you'd think the rate stabilization would make it become positive, but you have to look at it as forecasted. So thank you, Monica, for going through that.
So you're saying it seems counterintuitive, right?
To me, it did seem, and I'm glad Kohler had brought it up, because if you don't pay close enough attention to the word forecasted, you would think rate stabilization 700K would lower the 596 to a positive. But that said, the key is there's the word forecasted to me.
All right. As long
So
as
what you just said, David, makes sense to me, except that if we look at the forecasted with rate stabilization and we're taking out the 700 and some thousand, that still wouldn't turn it into a positive. But the number,
Yeah, you'd have to throw what I was thinking, Kohler, was that in the books you would throw the rate stabilization on the actual side, not the forecasted side. So if you throw it on the forecasted side, then that's where you get the larger negative versus if it was into actuals. And I think Monica was saying at the end of the year, the books, then you'd true it up with the actual side. Is that correct, Monica?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I had proposed in January to do just that, to review our year-end financials and our outlook, and then do that true up
Correct.
in December versus plussing and minus and plus and minus on a month-to-month basis.
That's true too. If you keep it plus or minus, then and wrap it in actual, it's more embedded and harder to see as if you just keep it on the forecast side. Understand?
Yes, this first page before rate stabilization, in my opinion, I feel like gives you a good, clear vision of how the co-op is operating without, that additional just rate stabilization. It gives your true revenue compared to cost of power and what your actual gross margins are.
Thank you.
Yeah, in our discussion before, this was, we felt was a more accurate picture going forward to see where we're really at. And then based upon results, whether the use of rate stabilization fund for this purpose is even needed. And if you look at this now, it doesn't really seem, at least in those 2 months, that the performance is necessary for the utilization of the rate stabilization fund. It's pretty good performance, frankly, considering there's a loss of revenue against forecast. So, this is like what we have been doing all along the past few years. This is the actual against a forecast without rate stabilization. I think it pays to look at this first and then see as we go along, how necessary was rate stabilization in terms of its usage, even in the face of poorer performance, revenue performance. And that's where it would show up if we used it. I don't know if that's any help or not, but that's kind of where I've been thinking about it.
I mean, I probably have the least financial acumen of anybody attending this meeting, but I would say just observationally watching another co-op that has relied a lot on deferred revenue in the last couple of years to stabilize its rates. They typically go into their budget year with a proposed amount of deferred revenue that they're going to burn in their budget, and then at the end of the year, the way their rate is set up is that there's a potential for a true up, and they, even with their baked in rate stabilization, have still missed their margin targets the last year or so and needed to do additional rate stabilization to avoid a true up. It seems to me that's kind of what we're tracking as though we've budgeted, and then we get to the year, it's looking like we might be in the inverse, right? Instead of needing to burn excess rate stabilization for a true up, we would actually burn less rate stabilization for a true up. Is that?
It looks that way at this point.
At this point, yeah, certainly 2 months in.
And you're looking at January and February, which are the two winter months with the highest revenue impact as a result of that. Maybe March. We haven't looked at March yet. So we might all reverse this in a moment. So.
Yeah,
certainly.
So
this March.
but typically the impact of warmer weather is far more impactful, right? In the early part of the year. That's when larger amounts of revenue are impacted by, yeah, colder or hot weather, being a winter peaking co-op, right? So any other questions on February then? I mean, this is a really good discussion, I think, and we want to make sure people are clear with the details. Anyone else? Okay, well, let's see how we're doing in March. Monica?
Okay. So I want to preface it, these March financials are still very much preliminary. We
Okay.
are waiting on one last revenue entry when our cycle 3 bills this evening. So so do keep that in mind as we review these, that the numbers will be changing. Let's jump right to our statement of operations. And the outlook currently, without this additional revenue adjustment, our operating margins did come in at 480,000, a negative 480,000 compared to a positive 432,000, which is a negative budget variance of 914,000. So I want to, because the gross margins section is very preliminary, I want to focus more on kind of discussing the controllable expenses and then our other expenses. So our total operating and maintenance expenses were 20% under budget, which is a continuous trend that we're seeing. One of the large factor in the decrease showed up here under admin in general, and that was due to receiving a large 300,000 legal settlement. And then the other portion of savings is really related to payroll being down. Those a handful of key staff. So then we had a large jump in our interest on long-term debt. So can't remember if we talked about it last month, but we did advance our funds for the CTP and the stranded asset sale. We advanced those funds early to lock in a favorable interest rates, but that did incur some additional interest expense for the month of March. We were able to invest those funds into a short-term commercial paper where we did earn interest, which is being reported down here in this section. So as a result, our net cost was 262,000 to advance the funds early, but doing a comparison of the U.S. Treasury rates from the time we locked in versus the end of the month, they had increased by 33 basis points. So over the long term, we'll see significant savings in making that decision. Some other positive highlights in March. I'm happy to report that our cash and operating liquidity has now reached in the green, which are meeting the board targets. And
yeah.
So we did receive some cash levels were supported by, we received 230,000 in some grant funds. So for previous projects that we had done in 25, we did receive those funds this month. And then there was a large insurance claim for a power transformer that was replaced in the Northwest substation, and so we received those funds on that claim as well. I wanted, because there was a lot of transactions that happened in March as far as advancing the loan funds and getting us ready for our April 1st withdrawal. We had some substantial changes on our balance sheet, so just wanted to highlight a couple of these sections for you. The actual entry for recording that regulatory asset in decreasing our tri-state patronage, that'll all show up on financials, but you'll see right here under special deposits is the amount that's sitting in escrow, that was sitting in escrow March 31st. And then our stranded asset sale has been delayed slightly with the title company. And so it's instead of April 1st, it's been moved to April 24th. And so we reinvested those loan funds again into a short-term interest, just be earning a little bit of income until we need to have those funds available. So that section right here is those two loan funds. And then you'll notice our long-term debt has now increased with that new debt we took on. That full $166 million is all being booked under long-term currently because the way the loan was structured, we have interest-only payments for the first 36 months. And so we have no current obligations for the principal payment for the first 3 years. That is summary I have. You guys have any questions?
Monica, I've got some color I can put on some of the sales figures whenever.
Let me just
like
go. Yeah, thanks, Dan. That will be helpful. But before we go there, let's just make sure there was a lot absorbed in that. First, I would just say these are preliminary, so let's be aware of that. And Kohler, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, one thing that caught my eye was you mentioned we had like $300,000 from a legal settlement. Did you elaborate on that?
And Kohler, let's do that in executive session. That's
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
Dusty, feel free.
Yeah, thanks. Just a strategy question. I know our payment is interest only. Do we plan to pay that down if we have any excess margin? Or have we talked about what we're going to do strategic wise over the next 3 years that loan is at interest only? Do we have any plans to pay down the capital part?
We do, and so we've structured the loan in 4 different type of tranches.
Yeah, I remember that
So
part.
we do have 40,000 right now that is in a 1-year tranche.
Okay.
That is when it comes to term, we'll have the option to either pay down all or part of the principal or refinance.
Okay.
Refinance the loan.
yeah, because there are significant prepayment penalties, right? So that's why we tranched it to give us the opportunity to prepay, if as it were, right? As opposed to locking in the entire thing on a term that was similar to our term that it would have been if we'd have continued to pay it through our tri-state bill. So that's why we've structured it that way in case we have sort of some excess funds and the board's decision is that it's financially prudent to do that. We have some opportunity because otherwise this isn't just sort of like paying your car loan off early. There's some pretty significant penalties to prepaying this.
Okay. That helps. Thanks.
Yeah, that applies to one or two of the tranches, but not all of them. So yeah, and that is an option. And hopefully, I think we would take that if we can. It's something we would talk about, I think, in this forum as well. So let me just summarize what I think I heard, and I'm not going to dwell a lot on specific numbers because I think there's still some preliminary. So maybe you could go back up to the operating statement, the before rate stabilization there. Thank you. So revenue down for the month. Also, cost of purchase power leading to a gross margin that's down. And also, it looks like operating expenses were down almost commensurate with the percentage of gross margins, right? So we held the line on some significantly on operating expense. It looks like, is that correct? But higher interest expense for taking a loan sooner, somewhat offset by earning interest on holding that. So that operating margin looks poor, but total margin when you add the interest back in is not as impactful. Is that correct?
Yes.
Still significantly off from the forecast due to the operating revenue being low.
Right. And again, that's very preliminary, and I do anticipate that number increasing. So
Sorry, preliminary on which?
the revenue is very preliminary, and I do
As well as cost of power?
cost of power is
Pretty
that
accurate.
number should not change. The only number that's really going to change is going to be that top line operating revenue, and then of course it'll flow down to the gross margins and operating
Okay,
dividends.
so operating revenue is still a little up in the air.
Correct, and I do anticipate it increasing, have a positive impact on the financials.
Fingers crossed.
Good.
Okay, Dan, maybe did you
Yeah,
want
let me add a little more, staying on this page right here. Like Monica just said, the purchase power should remain about the same there. Monica, yeah, thank you. The revenues, Monica was saying the industrial revenues are still rolling in, so I think that'll tighten that. You see some discrepancy between operating revenue and cost power. I think once that comes in, that'll be increasing operating revenue, making them both, pulling them in line a little more there. The relative sales this March were pretty drastically different. Just looking at residential alone compared to last year, 20% fewer kilowatt hour sales. That's a pretty large chunk. Of course, that does show up on the purchase power side of things, bringing them down together. The peak power charge has done a lot to stabilize our revenues on that residential side. So I think we may even see a flip in the where operating revenues may not be down as low as purchase power. I think our gross margins could increase is where I'm going with that. Yeah, it's interesting just to look at that. It is a big difference on sales for March. Very, very warm March, as we all know. Just trying to think if there was anything else I needed to mention there. The industrial sales, I think that's going to increase by approximately 5 million kilowatt hours and probably the proportionate amount of revenue to come with it. So that should balance out. And the good news is that that there are some compressor loads that did come back on, but we aren't going to see that until April. But I think that's going to be very temporary, and those are going to be turning off again here pretty soon. I think that's most of it. So I think there's that'll definitely change on those top two lines and calculation of the gross margin on what we settle in on. Oh, and what I know, the one other thing was there is that the overage for 5% did hit our purchase power bill. So it was a couple $100,000 more than anticipated because of that. Graham, if you recall, there was some changes in Tri-State's rules on not counting net metering. So they bifurcated that a little bit between dates of when that change in ruling occurred. And so as far as I can tell, that was properly accounted for. But due to extremely low sales overall in 2025, 5% of a smaller number makes that penalty greater, essentially. So the good news is we don't have to worry about that again. This is the last time that's coming around. So that did catch us by surprise a little bit on that. But yeah, a lot of moving parts to the financial statements this month, and this is a little preliminary peek at it this right now.
So that 5% is based on 2025. It's a true up of 2025.
That's right.
Will there be a true up of the first 3 months of 2026?
And there will be. That's going to be an interesting discussion. I don't know how. It'll be an interesting discussion because I could say, well, we were planning on having all this renewable shut down for the last 9 months, and we wouldn't have been over. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen. Graham, I don't think I've seen anything in writing on how that's going to be addressed.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that either, right? So I can go back and see what the true up, the relative true up language is in the withdrawal agreement, but
It may not
most
happen.
of it is focused on like the true up of the patronage capital and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The rate true up and stuff is rolled in there.
Okay. So yeah, it's yeah, and then wait till next month. We'll have a bunch more exciting things to talk about as we have a new
Different cost of power.
yeah, a lot of different things coming around there. Haven't gotten a peek into that yet, but that's all I had to mention there.
So rate stabilization might come into play here for this first 3 months for sure,
Yeah.
from the standpoint of a significant revenue decrease due to warmer weather that was not forecasted. Would have been really hard to forecast that, right?
Yeah.
Very unusual. And we're carrying a higher cost of power because of the rate increase as well from Tri-State.
Yeah.
So it will be really interesting to hear this at the end of Q2, see what it looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. Monica, thank you for carrying us through that. Anyone else have questions? We won't hold you much to this because we still have to wait for the financial non-preliminary final financials. If there's an opportunity to send those out before the board meeting to the FAC at least, or maybe to the whole board, at least to the FAC, I think I would appreciate that. But if not, don't worry about it. We'll see them when they come out in the.
So
in reading.
I do anticipate I'll have that revenue adjustment available tomorrow morning, and I do plan on having that updated on the financials and uploaded into the board packet.
Okay,
Let you know.
well, if you have a chance to hit send to the Finance and Audit Committee, feel free. Thanks. Anyone else? Other questions? I don't know if I can see everybody, but okay. Well, let's move on to, I guess it would be executive session, right? At this point in the agenda for transmission asset discussion update and power supply update. Somebody want to make a motion accordingly?
And also Kohler wanted to discuss the reference to the lawsuit settlement that hit the
That's right. Those three things.
February
That's an
financials.
addition.
So moved by Kohler.
Second.
Thank you, Mark.
And before I just want to publicly clarify this is legal settlement, not a lawsuit settlement, right? So that's I misspoke when I announced it. So legal settlement, not lawsuit settlement.
All right. Any discussion? We have a motion and a second. So doesn't look like it. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
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 Make sure you, okay, that's unanimous. Let's make sure that we all have the link. It was resent a little bit ago, and hopefully I'll see you on the other side. Thank you. Hi, this is Tim Wheeler again, back from the executive session of the March 2026 Finance and Audit Committee meeting. There were no actions coming out of the executive session, so we are adjourning the committee meeting at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.